Okay, team, let's get underway with this one. Um, this is a council workshop and it is around fuel crisis implications. Just noting again that Councillor Schlack is unwell and won't be joining us today. So I guess we get this underway. I guess my take on this is the briefing makes the position pretty clear. We're not yet in a supply crisis, but we're starting to wear the cost side of it already. And I guess the real question is, can council stop it? Which obviously, in my mind, we can't, but it's whether we're governing the exposure well enough if those conditions too do tighten, and just testing that we are ahead of those decisions rather than behind them. So I'd like to use this workshop just to test where we're sitting on that. But I'll hand over to Mr. Cook to introduce this.
Thank you very much. I just looked this morning, and almost a month to the day, this issue rose its head. Initially, as a civil defence response preparation is where it started, under the Lifelines banner, around whether and identifying essential services and the need for essential services, and how we would handle that. Almost similar, but quite different to the COVID response. But I believe it's actually morphed into what is officially described as a wicked problem. And for those who are not familiar with the term a wicked problem, it's a complex social, cultural issue that is highly resistant to resolution due to being incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements, and very interconnected factors. There's no definitive formula, there's no stopping rule. It's unique and unprecedented. There's no immediate or ultimate test of resolution. One symptom leads to another, and there's different disagreements as to what the problem solution is. So we established a small group in council to look at the risk, and it very quickly identified that there's four key risks. One is that we run out of fuel, and as an essential service and a Lifelines utility under the Act, and also having responsibility under civil defence and emergency management, that would be problematic. But also there's the significant cost inflation, which council is starting to experience on contracts. There's the cost of inflation to the community. And as you're well aware, we're a heavily diesel dependent industry-based community, agriculture, forestry, etc. There's the overall affordability impacts to the community at a time when we are seeking more money and they actually have less money to share with us. And then there's the cost of the overall inflation to our staff and the impacts that has on staff. So as I say, we formulated a team. Most of them are able to join us today. We've got Ken, who is happy to talk about more in depth about the risks that we've identified. We've got Amanda, who will give us an oversight into the implications on the overall budgets and the budgetary factors that we'll need to consider. I've got Josh, who has been looking at contracts, contract implications, and service levels, and whether if the shortage of diesel manifests itself, where we would start to look to cut services. Just on that, we have looked at the options of cutting services, and actually our services within council use very little fuel. It's our contracting services that really consume it. And we've got analysis from our main contractors as to how much they need to keep essential work going and how much they use to maintain their operations. And then we've got Teresa, who is considering the staff implications for this. And then, of course, yourselves, who need to consider in your decisions the impact this is having on the community now and the impact that the decisions we make at council will have on the community and the overall affordability. So happy to hand over to Ken, if that's okay, Chair, just to sort of reiterate the risks we've identified.
Yep, thank you, Ken.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken. I'm the risk advisor for Council. Council's current fuel risk profile is characterized as a credible, externally driven risk environment that is already starting to create pressure, particularly through rising costs. This is a risk we cannot control directly, but we can control how exposed we are and how well we respond. The risk is being driven by a global supply uncertainty, particularly geopolitical tensions and disruption to key shipping routes. New Zealand is highly exposed because we import all our refined fuel that sit at the end of a long supply chain. We are currently in a monitoring phase under the National Fuel Plan with adequate stock levels and no immediate supply disruption. Locally, Waitaki is particularly exposed as council relies on fuel-powered operations and contractors, and the district economy is heavily dependent on fuel-intensive industries such as agriculture, dairy, mining, transport, and wider supply chain pressures. We've broken down the risk issues to give visibility across the key impact areas. Firstly would be affordability and financial sustainability, which we have rated as high. This is the most active risk right now. Fuel, freight, and contractor costs are already increasing, and this puts pressure on budgets, capital programs, and affordability. Second would be the economic impact, which we have rated as high. Rising fuel costs will likely affect businesses, employment, and the cost of living. Third would be service delivery, which we rated as medium. At the moment, this is being managed. New Zealand has adequate fuel supply and readiness measures in place, but it remains a credible risk if fuel availability tightens or prioritization measures are introduced. And finally, workforce well-being and availability, which we rated as medium. Currently, these impacts are manageable, but there is a potential pressure through commuting costs, on-site requirements, and workforce availability if conditions worsen. Our current control environment improves readiness and coordination, but they do not reduce the underlying risk. The main drivers are fuel supply, pricing, and national allocation, which sits outside Council's control. Council has a good governance, coordination, and planning in place, but these controls only provide partial assurance as they help us prepare, prioritize, and respond effectively. We cannot control the supply, the prices, and the allocation decisions of national government, but we can control what we respond. Our existing controls improve our preparedness and response. It doesn't reduce the root cause, nor does it materially reduce the likelihood of the event, and it can only partially reduce the consequences. Right now, we have a cross-functional response team in place with ongoing engagement with national and regional partners. We've started engaging with contractors and completed an initial fuel dependency assessment, which is a stocktake of fuel requirements for lifeline and essential services, both in-house use and contractor use that delivers these services. We're developing a tiered fuel conservation measures and reviewing service prioritization and business continuity, and we're also assessing financial impacts. In terms of our overall position, Council is currently operationally stable, but increasingly exposed to external pressures. The risk environment is externally driven and evolving, and we are already seeing pressure come through. That will be all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Do you have any questions? Mayor Tevendo?
I guess just looking at when we change our step in this space as to, if we move into whether it's work from home or decreasing services or anything like that. I guess we're probably best to align ourselves with government settings, which yeah, obviously we've got discussions coming up and we'll keep an eye on, but do we have this ability to move fast if there is new phases brought to us through the government?
Mr. Cook?
Yes, the government ministry that's leading this work is the Ministry for Business and Innovation. They have a large number of people assigned to this. I believe at the last count they've allocated 150 people to work on the fuel crisis. They've made it very clear from day one that it will be a national led response. They will decide when the levels change, and they've got criteria around when the levels change. We, as a group, have been considering measures we would take. That includes the potential for staff to work from home, starting to look at where we may alter council operations to save some fuel. But as I've said, our actual day-to-day controllable operations use relatively little fuel. It's the big contract work led by our key contracting partners such as South Roads, Whitestone Contracting, Green by Nature, that really consume the fuel on our behalf, and it would be service level changes that we'd need to look at then. Now, of course, you've got a number of major capital program works with those contractors, and any delay in those starts impacting future compliance of certain pieces of infrastructure. And I'll invite Josh to just talk a little bit around the contract implications. So these people are under contract, legally signed documentation, and so maybe Josh will be able to just cover off the scope that they have for raising their prices, and what little scope we have for actually decreasing service and the implications that has on our saving.
Thanks. And I guess just further to Mayor Tavendale's thing, I mean, if national allocation does tighten, what does our service prioritization list look like? Do we have that documented, and is that something that perhaps we should be looking at a governance level to agree on what those priorities might be, which I know is part of today's discussion is around informing us on that, but just ensuring that we're aligned with that and it's ready to action. So I'll hand over to Josh to explain what happens in the contract space.
Thank you. As Mr. Cook's alluded to, the options that we have are not great. We are seeing significant increases in some of the costs associated with the contracts to deliver. There's been vendors that have already put information out saying that costs are going to go up by 30% or thereabouts. 30, yep. Pipe manufacture in particular is an issue. We've had an instance where we had a capital works project that was planned and we are not able to get that pipe in the country. And there is no plan for when that pipe is going to be manufactured in the country again. So we're having to look at some alternative options at the moment. The biggest cost increases that we'll be looking at are within the maintenance contractors or contracts. That's where the majority of the diesel is going to be used that affect our day-to-day service levels. CPI and cost fluctuations will eventually catch up and provide some buffer for our contractors in terms of loss of profit due to increasing costs. We have had one of the contractors reach out to us already and say, look, the CPI and cost fluctuation movements are too far delayed and they're having difficulties with cash flow. So they're wanting some kind of a fuel adjustment factor earlier on. I'm not sure where conversations will go with the other two, but I'm sure as the pinch continues, that we may end up with something sooner rather than later. My biggest concern is around breaching of budgets due to some of the CPI increases that we're going to be seeing in the coming months. There is some scope for us to remove certain sets of works from the contracts to be able to keep within budget. That will have a an immediate effect in terms of service levels. You know, for the Green by Nature contract, for example, we're talking about mowing lawns as a significant cost. We're in the low growth season at the moment, coming into winter, so we're not going to see the implications until later on. But as we approach summer, if the fuel prices continue to be where they are, we're going to be having to mow more regularly. We're going to need to have more lawn mowers in place, more staff on board to maintain the existing service level. And if we don't have that, the efficiency of mowing is then going to decrease because the lawn's going to be longer, and it compounds the problem. We can adjust service levels and not provide that level of service so we can decrease costs, but our contractors in the process of having that variation undertaken are then going to be seeking some liability from us in terms of lost profit and overheads. We can't just vary a contract and reduce all of the work that we give a contractor, because they allow for a certain amount of profit and overhead cover from the contract. So if we reduce the scheduled rates that we're having delivered, we then have to compensate them otherwise with that loss.
Councillor Lewis.
Through the chair, thanks, Josh. Does that mean that we have to accept a fuel surcharge or an increase on their contract? I mean, if we can't vary the contract from our side, they have the ability to do that from theirs, do they, legally?
Yes. So within the contract terms themselves, there'll be CPI and cost fluctuation increases that come in on the contract. It isn't strictly CPI that's used. There's a number of industry standard cost fluctuations that are applied to each of the contracts, but we are bound to give those where they come in within the contract terms. So the only option we have is to reduce the amount of work we do, but the contractor is still entitled to their fair share of profit and overhead associated with the contract. So we'd be paying the same amount of money to have significantly less work done. Yeah.
Josh, I know that when we put some of these contracts out, we're meant to be building in some flexibility to change in those contracts. How does that relate to this? With these contracts, we're meant to be more flexible than our previous ones.
Yep.
Where does that flexibility sit, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so the maintenance contracts, it's a given workload with an indicative value against it. So when we put the contracts out, there's a schedule of items that says we're anticipating doing X quantity of whatever the activity might be. And we approach the market with that and we say, look, there's going to be some flexibility in terms of X number of this versus X number of that, and then a total quantum of dollars spent. But that is an indicative quantum of dollars spent at that year's budget, so to speak. So as that budget grows, naturally with CPI and cost fluctuations, there is an anticipated increase in the amount of work that's delivered, which we do have some binding agreement to be able to deliver. So if that's not occurring, there is some come back on us in terms of additional profit overhead allocations. Yeah.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, I think this starts to illustrate the what I call the financial ecosystem that we are part of, in that if we cut work to our contractors, that has a flow-on effect to the people they employ who live in our district, who support our community in other ways. They go to the food shop, they pay our rates, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is why I really think this fits into the definition of a wicked problem. You pull a lever over here and it has a significant impact in somewhere else. And then you pull a lever to correct that one and you have a significant impact somewhere else.
Councillor McCain.
Firstly, thank you for doing this. It's good to have it front and centre, and I think we're all well aware of it. And I think actually 5.1 on page 5 and 6 sums up pretty much the whole system. And it's not only for this council, it's across the board. I think, how do I put that? So if you've got $10,000 in the bank and you're thinking that's going to get you through the year, but your washing machine blows up, you've got to cut something else out to make sure you got your washing machine back. So I think there's going to have to be some pretty severe looking at some bits and pieces just to get through this. And don't also forget it's not about us as well. If you go out again, and I'll go back to our rural community, their costs are just the same. the rural community has the only business in the world that buys retail and sells wholesale. And a lot of these cost factors that they're factoring in now, they have to have because they are actually running a business that will carry on. The implications of those costs won't come through for 6 to 8 months in the bigger scale as their business comes through, because the price of their produce won't increase, but their cost of doing business will probably triple by 30 or 40%. So where I'm getting it further down the track, if you try to recoup the losses, those people out there are also in great pain. And so the ratepayers that actually fund a lot of this stuff are in just as much pain as we are.
Councillor Hopkins.
Josh, I guess my question would be, brief observation. Some of the government's funding proposals at the moment are pegged to a particular fuel price. I think one of them being the allowance for teachers to travel to rural schools. That figure of 30% cost increase, has anyone done any work to sort of separate the short-term from the longer-term implications? Because I would have thought that some of those cost increases, or some of that cost increase as a totality, would be moderated if petrol prices and diesel prices drop. In other words, it would be a spike rather than a constantly upward travelling graph line. So how much of the 30% cost increase is deemed to be embedded, and how much of it might be temporary?
I think Mr. Cook would like to speak to that.
Partly. I'd like to give Josh some thinking time first. I think the problem that we've had, and I think almost everybody in the world has had with this situation, is that one day the narrative is that it's over, the fuel price is coming down, we've got peace. The next day the bombs are dropped, the fuel price surges, we're going to run out. It is so up and down that committing staff to do really in-depth analysis on this comes down to a judgment call. And I have to admit that we have not been doing that level of detail judgment call on this, because, as I say, we meet on average once, sometimes twice a week as the fuel committee, and we go from, okay, well, we've got something in place, we should be okay because we're now going to peace talks, to the next day, well, we need to have another meeting because we've dropped 2 days of supply nationally and they're dropping bombs again. So it really is such a volatile situation that the level of granular detail that we have is not there. We have some ideas around what we would do and how we would respond if we move to level 2 and level 3. But the real implication, we feel, which is why the actual running out of fuel is actually scored as the lowest risk, is the cost implications. And I'll get Josh to respond to your initial question, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cook. Just further to those comments, I think the best parallel you can probably draw is to COVID and the inflation events that occurred over the COVID period. We saw increases not just in manufactured supply of pipes and concrete, but fuel costs, food costs, etc. And those prices went up very, very quickly and took a very, very long time to come down, if they ever came down again. We've had a number of very, very large companies that have made record profits year on year since COVID occurred. I'd like to say that some of the prices will come down, but I don't know that will be the case.
Right, Josh, have you got more to add to your part of the story?
I suppose that just if there's any further questions with respect to our maintenance contracts in particular and what commitments we might have there. One of the challenges we do have, just in summary, is decreasing service levels to meet budget, which are not going to be intentional. We're not going to be well planned in terms of what we can and can't stop doing. And particularly in the water space, we can't stop providing water. We can't not repair pipes. There will be budget variances with some of the costs that are coming through. But yeah, just if there's any further questions.
I suppose our next phase that we would start to look at as the fuel committee is actually where we can stop or not initiate new projects. And Josh has already indicated that actually some of those are quite limited because they've got compliance aspects to them. But we've already talked about the fact that if they're under contract, then there's mechanisms built within those contracts to allow scaling up of costs, etc. So as the financial situation gets unstable or deteriorates, or whatever expression you want to use, it's really around what opportunities we have to not initiate new work. And then we would need to come back to you with that. And that's where we're going to get the greatest movement on the dial in terms of the financial situation. In reducing fuel consumption, I believe we just need to take a responsible position and not obviously, consume it unnecessarily. But as an organisation, we use very little fuel. It is in the big construction projects which already are locked in on contract or are not yet started, which we would need to consider.
Sorry. Alex, you wanted to speak? Sorry.
I was contemplating saying something, and I think I just wanted to try and join the dots between this and your last discussion and some of the other discussions we've got to have. And I think it's about, where we and other public service providers are at in the context of what has become an increasingly unstable and uncertain world. And I think you need to look at this fuel crisis as just the latest episode. And there will be more episodes to come. And that's the nature of the world we're living in through technology changes, political changes, societal changes. And it makes it really hard to plan what we do. But the thing we need to plan in everything we do, whether it be in the annual plan or the long-term plan, is that there will be uncertainty and volatility. There'll be other events round the corner that we can't anticipate. And that's the world we live in now. And if we ever get back to a stable state, in the term of this council or in the term of our lives, I think that'd be a great thing. But we are in a massive upheaval that is global in proportions and its nature. And this is just the latest episode. And I think there's a limit in terms of how much we can respond and react, but we need to keep taking a step back and thinking about what does this mean overall to us as an organisation, with costs of this falling on our community and on us as well, and our source of income is our community. And it's really challenging for people to explain. They just see their costs going up in isolation, and through events that are largely beyond our control. But we need to plan for more of these sort of events in the future.
I guess for me, as I kind of alluded to at the start, sort of knowing that we're ahead of this, obviously there's some work identifying some of those things that perhaps we could put on hold, and I'd be interested to know where we're at with that and whether that's going to come to us shortly to have a bit of a look at. Because I think making those decisions in advance of being prepared is going to be a real key to that. And the other question that comes out of what you just said, Alex, is recognizing that in the future things are going to be probably more volatile and there's going to be a lot more change in our world. Do we, again, revisit how we put our contracts out and some more protections within those contracts, or a different style of flexibility within those contracts? And I think that's a really good question for us to ask ourselves to ensure that we can have some flexibility around that. Mr. Cook and then Mayor Tavender.
Yeah, one of the sort of conundrums I've been wrangling with the group is what is essential service and what is value. So you could easily argue that perhaps the library is not an essential service, and therefore if we start running out of fuel or we run out of money, then there could be an argument presented for closing the library, keeping the staff at home. But it would save very little fuel And it may be a highly valued piece of resource that we provide to the community in times when they're not able to actually travel anywhere because they've run out of fuel, but they could walk to the library. So the wrangling between what is an essential service, what can be stopped, what can be started, and what is actually going to move the dial on both the financial situation and the fuel consumption situation is why I describe it at the beginning as a wicked problem. And I'm really looking forward to any pearls of wisdom, sage advice that the council can provide us, because we've, as I say, we've got some ideas, but it really doesn't alter the scale apart from starting to identify anything that's not yet started that we're not going to financially commit to.
Mayor Tevendale, then Councillor Lewis.
I don't like following that one because I'm not sure if I've got any of those pearls of wisdom. I guess there's a few things in that. One of them being that things like the library and closing that, it's not just a straight savings as well. You've still got staff that you're paying. You've still got most of the overheads. A few will go down, so it's a false savings that's not really going to get you anywhere but a bit of pain. So it's being really mindful, and I think that's something we need to potentially work through, and it might be putting them all on the table and debating the pros and cons when it comes down to it as to what's important before we come to the community and say this is what we're thinking. And I guess around the contracts, and we need to look where we can make savings, and I think that's really good discussions, but we also need to stay mindful that if in this process we also have some local firms tip over, because all of a sudden we have managed to, through our own contracts that have been really well worded, pull in those costs and make it workable. And as a result, we actually lose some local companies, then that's a problem as well. So it's not our problem, but it is our problem. So it's something for us to be mindful through these conversations. If we go really hard lined, we could spell the end of some people and their cash flows and things.
Mr. Cook, you'd like to reply?
I just want to clarify for the sake of our media representative in the room that I'm not considering shutting the library. So please don't put that in the en route mail. That was merely a scenario. I could have used the swimming pool, the gallery, the museum, anyone, or all of them. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Lewis.
I think that's the very definition of being wicked, really, isn't it? With that sense of humour, I guess the only way around that is defying gravity. For my musical theatre colleague, I can hear a groan from behind as well. Just a question with regards to, as we're getting in towards the colder months of the year with regards to heating, how are our heating systems and things in public buildings fueled? Are they diesel boilers, or is there a mixture of things? Because I noticed that the government is actually putting, I think it was about 37 million or something, towards education to change the heating systems over there. Is that going to be something that we are likely to face an issue with?
I can't provide a comprehensive response. I can tell you that a number of our facilities have recently had transitions from diesel systems over to a heat pump system. The library, Opera House, etc., is one particular example of that. I don't know if we have other systems that are still diesel. I know we have been making a concerted effort to transition over, but can't tell you whether that's complete or not.
Okay, where to from here? Who's next? Mr. Cook.
Just in response to Councillor Lewis's point raised around the government subsidy, I think that's an example of where we need to consider carefully what we do, and I think it's important to analyse some of that information of various measures that are occurring. We've got, for example, one business in town that's giving their staff an extra $100 a week to cover their fuel costs. But I know some people in that organisation, they walk to work, and some people drive a very long way. So that's a very blunt response. If I invite you to do your own analysis over the 37 million to convert the education boilers from diesel to some alternative power, how much it will save in terms of fuel compared to the consumption based on a day. And so we can very quickly react, but it really struggle to move the dial in terms of fuel saving or economic benefit.
Councillor McCain.
Yeah, look, I think you made some very good points, Roger, and I think therein lies the problem. We don't know what's happening out in that big wide world. We're not quite sure what's coming around the corner. We do know, as they say, the price of fuel goes up like a rocket and down like a feather. We understand how that works. I wonder, this is great that we're up in front and we're across looking at it, and I wonder if we just monitor it and just actually wait till we actually know what direction's coming. So we do exactly what you've highlighted here. We start thinking about, do we need to take that vehicle wherever it is? If we do we need to do 2 or 3 jobs while we're out there? Just do all that basic common sense stuff to start with and just actually watch what happens. And I'll be quite happy to do that.
Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Yeah. Are we having communication with other councils, especially, I guess, those similar to us? It feels like, given we're all dealing with this, that we shouldn't all be sort of doing this work in isolation.
Mr. Cook.
Indeed, yes. There's the piece of work being coordinated through the Lifelines effort in terms of the civil defence factors. So we're looking at how we would maintain our civil defence responsibilities in the event of ongoing fuel crisis. There's also a number of fairly frequent meetings online hosted by MB and DIA, which brings in all of councils right across the country, along with ministers present on those Zoom calls. So it does reflect the emphasis and the commitment that the government is doing. And that illustrates to me that I believe the government will do everything possible to ensure that we don't run out of fuel, which is why we've scored it at the lowest at the lower end of our risks assessment. We are involved, obviously, with our neighbours. It's a regular topic of conversation around how we deal with it. We are engaging, as Josh has spoken to, with our contractors, because our contractors are our partners in this, and we have to see them and the community and ourselves through this situation.
Teresa.
Yeah, and just on that as well, we're liaising with, for instance, other councils around how they're responding with their staff. So have had a look at a couple of other frameworks that align to the fuel framework for flexible working and things like that. As Roger alluded to earlier, it can be a bit of a blunt instrument. So we know that our staff are beginning to feel the cost pressure of their various commutes and the various lengths of those commutes as the petrol prices are rising. What happens, and this is the same with COVID, is that our back office staff are much more able to do flexible working or hybrid working, but our frontline staff are expected to turn up on site and are still required on site. And this is where we're looking at how we can be fair and consistent in this so that our frontline staff aren't continually, disadvantaged in that way. That's quite tricky. The other thing we need to think about, if we were to start to bring into flexible, go into a more flexible working, so more days at home is how other councils are looking at that. So as you go into the different levels, you might have 3 days at home, then 4 days at home, those sorts of things. we have to be careful that we're ready for coming back into the office, ensuring that we set expectations that it's not a creep away from the office, you know, from the permanent basis. So we're thinking about how to prepare for that from a people and capability perspective. And I think also when I talk about the frontline staff often being disadvantaged or not able to take advantage of things like working from home, if we were to think about how do we compensate for that, you know, that will not be palatable to the community. So these are the sorts of things just coming in as well for your wicked problem there, Roger. How do we apply fairness in a situation that isn't fair?
I mean, obviously, you know, we can't control the fuel supply or the price, but we can govern our exposure to it. And I think some of the things we're hearing here is that we need to have some clear escalation triggers. Like when do we take that step of maybe holding some contracts? But I tend to agree with John. I don't think we need to be reacting to everything until we know it. It's such a volatile situation. A service prioritization framework that's ready to go before the disruption hits, which clearly is what this piece of work is around. But I think the bit also is honest conversations with our community. And I think, you know, whether we're get ahead of this, you know, I know this will be made public, this workshop, but also I think some comms out there to get ahead of that, to what it really might mean for our community. You know, not the closing of libraries, pools, and those sorts of things, but you may not see your lawns mowed as often. Those types of things that are visual and people value more than they probably realise when suddenly it stops happening. So I'm just wondering, you know, do we have a comms front footing if this happens type thing? I hate to see it. It's not a scaremongering sort of scenario, but just a heads up.
I think certainly we can look to prepare a suitable comms messaging, and whether that comes from officers or whether that's something that elected members want to front foot, then we can get that prepared. I think the one of the key messages that MB and the DIA have tried to convey to us is that the expression "keep calm and carry on." We don't want to, and they don't want to create alarm within the community. They don't want to do anything that escalates panic buying, particularly at the early stages of the crisis when it was cheaper. I don't think anybody can afford to panic buy any longer, but they don't want consumption to go up. They don't want fuel reserves to go down. And nobody's got the true answer as how we deal with the cost.
Councillor McCain.
Yeah, look, I'd agree. And this is realism. This is just an actual day in the life of the world. And it's not only here, it's not only in this building, it's across the whole continent. And we've just got to cut our cloth to fit and just make it work as it is. And it's not something you can put on paper and say this is going to happen for 12 months. That changes tomorrow or the next day or next week. And I think we've just got to be in a position to move. And that's why I'm happy to see this paper here, because it's actually setting a program to actually set up and have processes in place that we can actually fix stuff instantly.
Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you. Just, I guess further to Councillor Lewis's questioning earlier, and Josh, you touched on, I guess, some of the changes that have been made to reduce, I guess, council's fuel dependency. Do we actually have a strategy in place, I guess, for what that looks like going forward, beyond, I guess, just what we're dealing with right now? That feels like probably a good thing to be thinking about.
I'll answer that. The piece of work, as I said, has really only been running a month, and we've been very much dealing with a sort of preparing for a response scenario. Again, as I say, I think the next two phases are looking around what new work we would potentially stop, and then how do we best prepare council for this sort of future scenario. And so whether that is moving to hybrid vehicles, solar power, things like that, more electricity dependence, encouraging contractors to use electric and hybrid machinery and things, etc. That's a much longer piece of work.
Yeah, thank you. Roger, I guess my question was more like if we actually do have any sort of plan or strategy in place right now in terms of talking about, what we've already done to be moving from diesel heat to heat pumps. Like, is there a strategy around that, or is that just sort of been a piecemeal kind of approach?
There's no current strategy which I could present.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Brent, just picking up on your point about whether, at some point we may need to think about stopping contracts or impacting them. I know that is hypothetical, and mercifully at the moment we don't appear to be close to being obliged to do that. But I do have a question for officers, because it seems to me that stopping contracts has embedded within it some of those wicked issues you talked about. Because if we froze capital projects, then there may be carry forward implications and other issues like that. If we froze maintenance, then superficially that would seem to me to be actually in the longer term less painful, although it might cause some public concern if the grass grew too high or whatever. But I'm just curious to know if officers should there be a need to push pause on contracts, which area would you prefer to focus on, maintenance or CapEx?
I think we'd have to make a call on that on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the project was, and potentially depending on what the current contract market was looking at as well. We've had a sustained period, I suppose, since post-COVID. There was an explosion of work and lots of stimulus went into the industry. Since then, there's been a significant retraction, and we're seeing that a lot of businesses are actually doing it quite tough in the civil contracting market. A lot of work has been talked about coming, but it actually hasn't landed to market. So we're seeing quite a lot of civil contractors that are not seeing a lot of work come through their books. And if we retract in the same manner that a whole lot of other businesses also retract, we could end up in a situation where some local firms aren't able to sustain their operations anymore, which has implications for us in the long term as well. So I don't think it's as simple as giving you a straight out answer of we'd cut back on capital or we'd cut back on maintenance. I think we'd have to make a call depending on the priority of that particular project and the contracting market that would generally be associated with that project.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? Amanda?
I can just add a little bit of the financial picture. So this is in line with the conversations that we've been having around the long-term plan. And just touching on the OPEX, CAPEX situation, you could also consider it in terms of funding. So our direct cost of fuel is only around 200,000 per annum. And there's probably not much use in, like, you talk about the libraries and things that only use a small portion. It's not going to have a major impact on our rates. Like 200K is a very small portion of the rates take. But our total contractor costs is about 24 million. So that is principally your roading and waters contracts. So those are the only ones that you can really, that it's worthwhile looking at, and the parks contract, to make any significant decrease. If there is an 8% increase in that 24 million, you're talking an almost $2 million increase in costs right away. And so if we're seeing those cost rises in this current financial year, our rates are already set for this year, so we can't subsequently increase them. So I guess considering through the LTP, where the difference between the 19% rates rise and the other option of 27, that was the 8% there for the increase in fuel costs, so that we can future-proof, set our rates in June for that next financial year, bearing in mind that the cost could increase 8%, and that will give us that $2 million extra rates income to directly cover those increase in contractor costs to keep our roads maintained at the same level, to keep our pipes upgraded whenever they break or whenever they've passed their use by date and things like that. So that's just doing the bare minimum. And Josh has already talked about the parks contract as well, maintaining it at that level of service. So you can see that we're talking quite material numbers, and it's only really in those big, huge contracts that you can make quite a substantial change to the numbers. So that's the OPEX funded by rates. And then on the other side of it, the CapEx, our capital program for next year is 57 million. So an 8% increase on that is about 4.5 million. And once again, we know that's pretty much all waters, like 47 million of that is waters, which has due dates that we need to complete it by. There's not much choice there. And that's all debt funded. So if there is what do we got? 10-15% rates increase in costs, then that does away with all of our debt headroom. So it's just thinking about it in terms of setting the budgets for next year, making sure that we're making these tough decisions to give us enough headroom in case these costs do actually eventuate, because I don't see them coming down. So like we've built in the 8%, we've made that suggestion as part of the annual plan budgets, but 8% is kind of on the lighter side, and that's the indication of price increases we're getting now. Who knows what we're going to get next year? And we can't change the budget when we're halfway through. We can't go and ask for more rates halfway through a financial year.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Amanda. Through the chair, with regards to variance of contracts, what's our penalty liability? I mean, that's the other way of looking at it. If we did need to trim something back, what sort of percentage do we know roughly that we'd be looking at in terms of a penalty?
It will vary on a contract by contract basis, and it would be just lost profit and overhead. On some contracts, that would be quite substantial, and others less so. As a percentage, it's difficult to give you one because of the different contracts, different overhead allocations, the different types of work. Yeah, sorry.
No, is that an option potentially to look at?
Yes, it is. Yep. If we want to keep within budget, we can trim work back. It's just recognising that we'll be paying the same levels of profit and overhead to a company that's then doing less work for us. Yep. So there'll be a change in service level that we'll receive because of that.
Just mindful of time as we've got guests on our next one, Mayor Tevendale.
I think I know the answer to this, and anything we don't know, we probably can't answer. But I guess when we're looking at our Three Waters program in front of us in the next 12 months, and we're looking at availability of some of the basics becoming much harder and all these pressures, there may well come a time nationally that there needs to be a conversation around some of the timeframes we're setting for ourselves to match national legislation that may not in this environment actually be viable. They're not going to enter into that conversation easily, I'm sure, but it may be something that we need to make sure we're building our understanding and our story around, because I can see some real risk in a lot of our delivery of our programs in the water space, which is also driving our rates increase. And if we're also looking at, while trying to deliver that program, going well above what we had budgeted on, there's a twofold risk on that, both in the cost and in the delivery. So, I think there's quite likely going to be conversations need to have, but I can't imagine the government doing those easily.
Josh.
Sorry, just very quickly at that point. In the operational space, we are looking at where we have long lead time items such as pumps, or where there might be limited availability, particularly within country for some of those kinds of items, and we are placing orders well in advance. The particular item that I'm a little bit concerned about would be the replacement membranes for the Waimaru water treatment plant. They're scheduled to get here around September. They're manufactured in Europe, so we'll be very, very closely monitoring what happens with that situation. But we are already experiencing instances where we've gone to water pumps and those pumps aren't available in country, and we've had to go for other ones which probably not quite going to do the job or last quite as long, but had to do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to provide water. In the capital space, I think us ordering some of those kinds of items sooner rather than later, where we know what we're going to be requiring, is should be happening. And I suppose the important thing for us to do is make a concerted effort to deal with things where we're talking about where there's a risk to public health, where we're talking about drinking water compliance issues, and potentially be prolonging some of those other items where it might be a replacement of existing pipework, where we can potentially patch and repair rather than necessarily replace.
Thank you, team. Informative, good discussion, and good to see that we're thinking about what the next steps are. It is pretty tough when everything's so volatile, and fully understand. 1 week you think it's one scenario, and the next it's another. So, I look forward to continuing this discussion, and thanks very much for all the information that you've brought forward. Thanks.